Hello and welcome to Triumph Tales. It's been a quick journey, but we're now at the last episode of the first series, and I'm delighted today to have a very special guest, which I'll introduce in a second. But as you remember from the beginning, we really wanted to focus on business, leadership, and technology. And today I want to talk very much about leadership, and not just leadership, but youth leadership in particular. So I'm delighted to have Martin with us today. A young person. Welcome to it. Welcome to it. Martin Tan. Now, just give you a quick brief on Martin, because at the moment he's the Chief Executive Officer of the Majurity Trust, a philanthropic organization providing philanthropy as a service. To prove I can say it twice.
Yes, you can.
In Singapore. And Martin was formerly the Executive Director of the Institute of Social Leadership at Singapore Management University, SMU, and co-founder of Halogen Foundation Singapore, which I want to talk about a lot. So you're also a motivational speaker, a leadership trainer over the last 15 years. You've been conducting leadership programs for youth, educators, corporate organizations in countries such as Afghanistan. I didn't expect that to be the first one we talk about. Australia, Bhutan, China, Hong Kong, India, Philippines, UK, and the USA. So welcome again.
Thank you very much.
Martin, tell me a little bit more about Majurity Trust, your latest venture.
Latest venture. Well, Majurity Trust is a philanthropic organization in Singapore. We are a registered IPC, an institute of public character in Singapore, which allow us to give tax deduction. We work with over 500 donors. We aggregate resources, and we have 12 philanthropic funds that we channel it to. And we give out as grants to the specific charities on the ground in Singapore. We're primarily in Singapore through the 12 different funds. The funds cover anywhere from elderly dementia to youth mental health. Our goal as an organization is to bring enough resources to support the charities on the ground, to build stronger organization, to build a place where in Singapore everyone can thrive. So that's our ideal.
Fantastic. Now, you've been at this for quite a while, and one of your previous ventures was Halogen, which I'm personally involved with, just to declare up front.
But he is now my boss.
No, not at all. But not at all. But the key for me is, can you talk through what Halogen is and what made you set it up in the first place?
Well, Halogen is a youth development organization. It's been around now for 21 years. I started it together with a good friend of mine, Jeffrey Ip. So the two of us started in about 2003, when we both had our full-time jobs, as with all good startup story goes. I was working in church full-time. Jeff was working at the National Youth Council back then. And we saw an opportunity to bring in an organization back then called the Young Leaders Foundation. We both are passionate about young people and the aspiration and idealism of young people, but there wasn't really a charity that build and invest into leadership capabilities and the leadership beliefs and the confidence in young people the way that we thought would have been wonderful. So the passion and the purpose for us building young leaders back then was the idea that young people can change the world, and if we can influence them right, there's a lot we could do. And that's some 21 years ago when I started it when I was 6 years old.
Now, Halogen, we as Halogen have impacted over 200,000 kids' lives here in Singapore, which is an incredible number. And why leadership? What was the spark for leadership?
I like an author by the name of John Maxwell. He has a good quote that says that everything rises and falls on leadership. I kind of find that to be really true. Every good thing and every bad thing in the world is as a result of what a leader does. So one question I often get asked is why the name Halogen? So Halogen, for those of your listeners who are into science and chemistry, is in group 7 of the periodic table. It is highly useful in everyday life, your chlorine, your fluorines of the world, but if you use it terribly, if you use it wrongly, it's absolutely detrimental for the human body and society as a whole. We see young people and leadership the same way. If you guide them right, if you influence them right, if you lead them in the right direction, they can be tremendously useful in changing the world. But just like leadership, and like young people everywhere in the world, you could lead them wrongly, and you could lead them to devastating outcomes. So a large part of why we do what we do is so that we can have a generation of young people who will actually live to the ideals and the idealism of what young people want to have, which is to change the world for the better. And we can play a small part in not just instilling that level of idealism, but to fan that flame and to give them the competency to arrive where they want to do and what they want to do in changing the world, then I think we've done a small little part in their lives.
I think it's not that small. I mean, there's a couple of 100,000 kids have gone through this. And a few years ago, or a number of years ago, you also brought in a new program from the United States.
That's right.
Tell me more.
So it's called Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship. As time went along, we started in 2003. In 2004, we really slowly grew in a big way. We started having 2 National Young Leaders Day, which is our big events. 1,000, 2,000 kids come together at the same time. And then the teachers started saying, hey, beyond all these events that you run, we really want to train the kids on a class basis. So we give them the tools and the competency. So just like how businesses grow and how organizations grow, you sort of really grow to the saturation where your customers or your audience start asking for a bit more than what you were doing, just to complement it and just to add on. So when it came round about that time, 09, 10, we started looking at the suite of products that we're doing, the training that we were doing. We were building a lot in the belief system, the character, the values. We give them leadership competency. But if we are really wanting to build them into changing the world and creating organization, project and initiatives, we sort of needed to add one more dimension to it, which is to create an entrepreneurial mindset. The ability to say, not just having the character and the sound of mind to want to do something, we wanted to give them the tool and the ability to actually do something about it. So when the opportunity came, we got to know the founders of Nifty, Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship from the Wall Street, visited them, had a chat, and we said, hey, this can work. So the same thing we did in 2003 when we visited New Zealand and Australia to bring Young Leaders Foundation to Singapore. We did it in New York, we brought Nifty back into Singapore, and we complement that with the leadership curriculum, building the internal aspect of a young person, is their leadership aspect, the aspirational aspect, and then we undergird that with entrepreneurship training and entrepreneurial mindset.
You see, for me in this podcast series, what we've been trying to do is to show the almost supply chain from young people aspiring to get their education and so on, but they're also aspiring to start their own businesses, raise money, start tech companies, and then scale them into big companies. And I've been very lucky to talk to leaders of all these different organizations, but this is right at the beginning of that supply chain. Now, something we were talking about earlier, you really focused on helping people with belief, belief in themselves, belief in their capabilities. Was this a real spark behind all this?
You can say that. At Halogen, we have a philosophy that undergirds and hasn't changed in the last 21 years. And the philosophy is that our belief system as a person impacts the values you and I adopt. Our values impact our behaviors our action. So the challenge in education, in a lot of character education, if you will, we do a lot of what we call behavioral conditioning, which is we tell young people, if you do a certain thing in a certain way, after 11 days, 21 days, you form habits and so on and so forth. But almost always they revert back to their original state because that's behavioral conditioning. That requires incentive, and if the incentives are no longer there, the behaviors no longer correspond. What we believe is that if we can build on the internal side of the person, the belief system of the person, their mental models, their worldviews, how they see themselves, how they see the world, how they see themselves in relation to the world. If we can build that belief system strong, if we can build a purpose into that belief system, the values that they will adopt will correspond. The way they look at the world and they realize that, hey, these are the values that I need to navigate this world that we have. And their behaviors and their action will slowly correspond. So if I think of any entrepreneur, or any social entrepreneur for that matter, in building any successful businesses or any impact organization, the core at the end of the day is why do they do what they do? And that really sits with the belief system side of things. So when we first started, we worked with age 10 to 16, and that's really our biggest crowd. 13 to 16 is sort of the tipping point for us. And what we were trying to do was to lay the foundation so that the supply chain can continue, right? So if we can lay the foundation of the belief system and value system from young, the likelihood of them starting enterprises that are socially responsible, working in roles and leading teams responsibly is a lot higher than not. So if we can do that at the start of their growing years, in the impressionable years, then I think we set the world up for a better success with the kind of people we have.
Outstanding. And some of the people that we have within Halogen are incredibly impressive. And one of the things that I really enjoy working with these guys is that it's a very young crowd. And so it's not just old people like me coming in and telling them you should be, it's not at all like that. It's youth with youth, right?
We've always wanted Halogen to be represented by young people. So our CEO is in her 30s. I stepped down after 10 years in my 30s, largely because we wanted young people to have a closer age they look up to and say, wow, if this person is only 15 years away from me, but she's leading this organization that is, reaching over 200,000 people. Surely I can do that as well, right? And not to say that we don't want older people. A majority of us on the board now are slightly on the older vintage. But what we bring at the board to the management, who is a management team of very young people, is the wisdom, is the experience that we have. But the price we pay as a board to have a young team is that we're far more involved. We guide them, we mentor them, we sort of have to pick up the pieces if they make the mistakes. But in the overall goal and idealism and aspiration for Halogen has always been, we want young people to lead young people. We want young people to say, hey, if these seniors of ours have the ability to do what they do in such an incredible way, surely I can do something like that as well. And then the board comes in to support with the wisdom and experience.
As I heard the other day, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who said it, but it was, I'm just a little boy learning about this world. I just happen to be a few years ahead of you. And I really like that term, right? So have you seen in the last 20 years any changing requirements in leadership in the youth of Singapore?
I'm not sure if it's changing requirement. I think at the core of who we are, young people remains very much the same. They still want belonging, they still want identities, they still want to be part of a tribe, except that the way it manifests becomes different, right? So in the past, in order for me to be seen as part of a tribe, I joined a gang. Today, I don't have to really join a gang to show that I'm part of a place. Today, I can be part of a movement online. I can be part of the Me Too movement, for example, which is far more global. So I think our young people's innate behavioral desires doesn't change very much. The way it manifests changes because of social media, because there's a speed and a flow of information. And I think young people today are far more connected globally. They may not have traveled in a lot of those places, but they're bound by a common ideal that is propagated, both good and bad, right? The challenge, just like with young people before and young people now, is that you can lead young people without explaining too much if it's captivating enough. So one of our goals is really to teach young people how to question. To question almost everything they listen, so that they can come to their own conclusion and not just follow what is being told. Now, that's not that easy, but it's a worthwhile endeavor.
I'm a big believer in learn how to ask good questions.
Curiosity is really an absolute requirement these days.
So one of my hobby horses is a constant criticism of education around the world, on the basis that there's a lot of gaps in what we put our children through. I've got 3 boys, all at different stages, 2 of which are still in education, but I never seem to think, or I never feel that they're filling the requirements that we need. Now, leadership is one of those. Did you see that Halogen is able to provide something that education doesn't provide, or do you see it more as a complementary service?
Yeah, I think it's more of a complementary more than anything else. A large part of how we work with government is to be an ally, as a complementary to what the mainstream education needs to provide. There's only so much time and so much resources the curriculum can build. So now, if I have a magic wand, if I can do anything I want, which we don't, but assuming if we do, I would have loved to build the idea of leadership development into history lessons. Right? We study history leaders all the time, but we don't teach history through the lens of leadership. We teach history through the lens of historical accounts
and events.
So there are things that we could do, but it's a very, very different skill set, very different experience. It's not something that I expect of any education system, because that's not core. So therefore, what we do as Majurity is to provide an alternative or a a complementary program that young people who are interested in this can take this further and say, you know what, I've studied this guy in my history lessons. Oh, actually in leadership side, that's what this person have done, that's what they have accomplished. And these are the traits that the leaders have, and so on and so forth. This is how I can do it as well. So I don't ever think that, I mean, take Singapore for example. Leadership is one of the core 21st century core competency, right? So it has been embedded into our core Singapore curriculum. But that it's still through the activities that the school does, the prefects, the counselors, and so on. So all we're doing to say, hey, we can help you do this better. Let's provide the base, let's provide the methodology, the philosophy, and the programs so they can take either during school time or after school time. And collectively, we can work with each other to make it better.
Traditional debate is, are leaders born or are leaders made?
Yep.
You know, is it genetic or is it learnt?
Yep.
What's your view on that?
Well, my standard answer is that all leaders are born. I mean, if you're not born, then you cannot be here. So,
okay.
Yeah. So, to a certain extent, we teach it this way. Leadership is 1% born and 99% made. There are some, I can't deny the fact that you go to a playground, there are some children who just seem to have that innate leadership capability. You can tell them from afar, they're the one that's barking orders, they're the one that just have the ability to pull and rally people.
And the other kids are comfortable following
Yeah,
straight away.
and people,
Right?
so I believe wholeheartedly that there are leaders who are naturally gifted and naturally born. But a lot of leadership can be learned. A lot of leadership can be nurtured. The way you present, the way you incite confidence, the way you bring people together, the way you resolve conflicts, those are skills that you can learn. I've now done this 20 over years. I've seen both sides of the camp. I've seen kids with natural born leadership abilities who, because they're so natural, they don't take time to develop the practices and the skill sets. Versus someone who is not born with that innate capability, but they work hard at it because they know they're not naturally gifted. They go for courses, they apply, they do their homework, they go out of their way. Most of the time, the guys who are not born but work harder tend to become better leaders. Because while the innate give us that leg up, it is still the practices of a leader that makes or break a person's leadership journey.
You touched on communication, and this is a thing I'm passionate about, is good communication skills. Obviously, presentation skills are terribly important nowadays, but also written communications, whether it's a keyboard or a pen that we used to use in the old days. But it's just so important to be able to communicate properly. And I see that those leaders that I've met, both young, older than me, my age, whatever they may be, and running small businesses, large businesses, or just teams, they've all got that one thing in common. They're very good communicators. Coming back to Halogen, we're 20 years, 21 years this year. For the next few years, what would you regard as the next set of goals?
I think for an organization reaching
and maybe
21.
You should be asking me this, but
I'm actually I should. I think we have discussion enough. There's always an aspiration. Okay, let me put it this way. There is the business side of the decision, and then there is the aspirational side of the decision. Both, I think, are intertwined to a certain extent. The business side of the decision is that I think as a board and as an organization, there's only so much in Singapore when it comes to market. We are seeing a dwindling birth rate, and education system is also closing schools. We're expanding our work to cover mentoring, entrepreneurship. We're looking at not just youth leadership development, we're looking at youth development. So it's widened our scope. But inevitably, we'll come to a place where we'll hit a plateau. We can go deeper in the work that we do. But one of the things that we didn't want is for our Singaporean young people to be isolated in their worldviews, in their meta models of what the world is. Sometimes we can be. Because our young people's view of the world is very colored by the media that they watch, the social media, less so the traveling. So the dream that we had, and we started dreaming about this a while back, is what if we can take Halogen to more parts of the world, more parts of Southeast Asia? What if in the next 10 years, we just celebrated our 20 years last year, so as part of that, we started dreaming about where we will be in 30 years. What if we are in each of the capital cities? in ASEAN for a start? What if we could do something in India, in Nigeria? There are tremendous opportunities. Believing in what I would term as a very hyper-local model, where it's still about local leaders inspiring local young people and training them to become better versions of themselves, to do world-changing work in the countries that they're in. So I can see that happening. I can see in time to come, maybe for our 30th year, we could potentially have the National Young Leaders Day, where we have young people from 7, 8 countries coming together. But it's not easy. It's a whole new muscle the team has to build. To start up in Bangkok, to start up in Jakarta, is a whole new different skill set.
So Halogen is a not-for-profit organisation, and we survive on the contributions of others, both in monetary terms, but also in contribution terms. If people wanted to get involved with the organisation, either corporates or individuals, how would they go about it?
I think a variety of ways. I would first start by getting to know us, having conversation, lunches, coming to become a judge at our Nifty competition. The more friends get to know a little bit about what we do, it gives them a sense of, oh wow, these are the possibilities. We have companies and corporates who come in as corporate mentors, and their staff comes down, they spend time with young people. We have donors who have become judges on our Nifty competition, whom they love because they saw, hey, wow, these are kids are coming up with really good ideas. And then last but not least is really supporting the organization financially. As you've said, we are an IPC charity, and a large part of what we are able to do is having people who believe the work and giving the funds necessary for us to get there. We run a very highly subsidized rate of the programs that we do in school. And the subsidies and the donations from donors allow us to continue to put at the price point that the schools can afford for a large group of students. So you were mentioning earlier that we reach over 200,000, and one of the reasons why we can reach that kind of numbers in those years that we have in a leadership development space or a training space is largely because we could price it at a charity rate, right? Yeah. What typically schools do is that they keep the program for only the prefects. Because that's all they can afford. So what we do is that we take the same budget and we say we want to do every single student, and then we cover that with donations, with funds that donors give us. And our goal is continue to reach a whole generation of young people. And if we can keep doing that with the support of donors, with the support of corporates coming in to provide us with the resources, then we can continue growing. Some companies have other are MNCs. They have corporate offices in other of these countries. So if they say that, hey, some of the countries you're talking about, we have our staff there, we have people there. Why don't we work together and actually bring you across? We would love those kind of conversations.
Very much so. Yeah. So with skills at the moment that we are looking at for young leaders, what type of skills would you recommend that they pick up that would have a big impact today? Because the world's changing all the time.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think whether is it going to be very different from what I expect from a youth who is becoming a leader, or a young staff who just joined the organization who is becoming a leader, or an older leader. I think they're fundamentally the same. When we hire, or when I hire people, I look for 3 things, right? I look for character, I look for chemistry, I look for competency. So at the base essence, it's still a character conversation. Who you are as a person, what's your values as a person. Anything that undergirds who you are as a leader. A leader can only operate out of the function. We talk about this, the belief system, the behavior, and the value system. So a large part of a leader's manifestation, it is authenticity, his ability to lead, still goes back to who you are as a person. Right? So the competence side are practices that they can develop, the ability to, I think we mentioned a bit earlier, to present well, to lead with confidence, the ability to have empathy of the team members that they have, and I think that goes a long way. The ability to listen. A lot of time, leaders tend to want to communicate, but leaders are not very good at listening. A good friend, his name is Dr. Mark Strom. He wrote a book called Art of a Wise Leader. I've always loved this quote. He said that communication is the sharing of created meaning. Conversation is the creating of shared meaning.
There you go.
And I love that because in our business world, and I use business world loosely because even in the non-profit world, it's still the same corporate environment. We tend to go for meetings. Leaders tend to go into meetings very ready to communicate what they have already made up their minds for. And then you wonder why there's no ownership for the rank and file either. Because we're not opening up a place for conversation, to hear, to listen. So I think whether leaders who are young, who are old, I think those are pretty common things that we'll look for. The ability to listen, whether you empathize. One of the programs we run is called the Leadership Challenge, and we wrap around the 5 core practices or 5 practices of exemplary leadership. Do leaders model the way? Do they inspire shared vision? Do they challenge the process? Are they always looking for new ways of doing things? Do they enable others to act? And do they encourage the heart? And I think if leaders can practice those, whether they're young or they're old, I think it will land them in a far better place in their leadership journey.
How about tips for people that may be listening that have seen a story from you that you've started multiple charities or social enterprise?
Yeah.
Well, I think I know what you're going to say, but what would you say if they wanted to start it and start this journey that you've been through? What would be your coaching?
My best advice, don't.
Yeah, I knew that was coming. I knew it was coming.
Don't.
Why? Because it's tough or because it's unrewarding? I mean, why would you say don't?
No, I'm just joking. It's extremely rewarding. It's been the highlight of my life. I've been in non-profit now for close to 25, 26 years. So first working in the church, starting new programs, new initiatives, to starting Halogen, to pioneering work at SMU with Institute for Societal Leadership, and then now Majurity Trust. Every step of the way has been absolutely fulfilling. But it is extremely hard work. The non-profit world doesn't have one metric that the corporate world would have, which is profit and losses. Right? So
everything else is the same, right?
Yeah, everything is the same. So when I measure impact, it's a little bit more complex because I have no one single number to go to, whether are we profitable or are we not. We don't tend to make profit. We still run with P&L. We still have a balance sheet. So to a certain extent, the running of a charity is no different from running a business. It's really the same. Same principles, same management style to a certain extent. The difference is we can't buy our way out of problems.
Yeah.
We can't outsource some of the work because we cannot afford it. And we can't use money as an incentive to drive people. So in absence of this tree, then how do you do it? Then the purpose becomes important. What is your ideal? Why are we doing what we're doing? Becomes an important conversation. The leadership style will have to evolve from a carrot and stick kind of leader, or you almost need to lead people to a promised land that you have never been yourself to be able to articulate that. I think you talk a little bit about the power of storytelling, and that is going to be an important aspect to it. So any tips to young people or anyone who want to start you always got to start with the reason why. At Majurity, we fund a lot of new charity startup. 70% of my funds, we aggregate now about 55 million. Majority of the fund goes to smaller startups. So one of the key things as we work with them in their application phase is to help them discover for themselves what the theory of change is about. Now we're very good at thinking about an ideal state of life, but if we don't put a theory of change to it, we can never know where we are going, right? So businesses is the same thing, right? So we're applying business practice into it and say, hey, think about it. If you really want to start a non-profit charity, or if you are clear about where you want to go, then what's your theory of change? Do you have the resources? Do you know the people that you will provide you the resources to get there? And can you recruit enough people to actually be part of your cause? And it's not going to be strangers. Most of us in the non-profit space, my first volunteer is my wife.
There you
go. And then my friends, relatives. And if you can convince relatives and friends to come alongside, then maybe you have a really exciting enough venture. And then from there, it's just hard slog all the way with no proliferation in a bank account to excite you, but just the stories that you hear, the feedback from people that gives you the fuel,
impact that you have.
The impact that you have that will fuel you for the next year.
And a shameless plug, if people are interested in making donations, just take a look at halogen.sg or reach out to us through this podcast. But I think keeping that supply chain with leaders coming through in Singapore getting the funding that people can need and starting these businesses and continuing to help grow this country is just tremendous. So I'm absolutely delighted to have you in today, as always, Martin. It's a pleasure working with you with Halogen, but it's just total respect to you starting this organization from the beginning, and wishing you every success with the Majurity Trust as well. So
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for this opportunity.
Pleasure. Thank you.